Pag di nagtigil ng katuturuyan, baka putulin ko ang titil yan.
In our fight against communism.
Mabuhay ang NPA! Motherfucker! Alisin mo yan! Adik ka ba?
My God, I hate drugs.
Hi everyone, I'm Boy Abunda. Good evening. On behalf of PhilDocs, or the Filipino Documentary Society, welcome to Daang Dokyu, the home of Philippine documentaries. Tonight, we talk about documentaries. At syempre ang mga documentaries. At ano ang papel nila sa kwento ng bayan at kwento ng mamamayan. Ang mga pelikula po na ating pinalabas itong mga nakaraang araw bear witness to a narrative's power to awaken, engage, to inspire, and even enrage. Power that can affect change, yet vulnerable to abuse. Sana'y tingnan ho natin ng mabuting ating line-up ng mga pelikula ngayong linggo. Under the theme Nation, Perception is Real, Truth is Not, on daangdokyu.com/watch na.
Halos malasahan ng bakal. Hindi na lang sa bala. Hindi na lang sa patalim. Ganito raw humingi ng kapatawaran.
Mabilisan na nag-report at nagpadala ng mga litrato ang mga kasama ko. Pinagsuspetsahan pa kaming Abu Sayyaf dahil sa dami namin mga lalaki.
Siya yun. Diba hardcore siyang Marxist?
Being a mother in the revolution is leaving your children in the right place.
Dito sa Region 11, you have succeeded in crushing the communists and we look up to
Hinihingi
you.
namin ipatupad yung tunay na reforma sa lupa.
$100 each to oust Aquino from power.
The right against self-incrimination and the right to remain silent.
The internal security of the nation is the function of my department, and I can tell you now, it's going to be messy.
What had started as a walkout by a small group of Filipinos became a boycott. The men had set in motion one of the biggest labor struggles in American history.
Totoo nga, ang minulay ng ugat, may krisis sa ekonomiya.
Kaya rin akong naipon.
Kung kaya nga dumadagsa at maraming lumilikas.
Ng aking pamilya, matulungan.
Ang duration ng research ay kung gaano man katagal ang relasyon natin. Ang end goal ay ang ating eventual permanent reunification in 5 years at the earliest.
Si Imelda, sinasabi niya na pabalikin lang siya rito sa Pilipinas, hindi siya makikialam sa politika, pero unang-una siya nag-file ng kandidacy niya. Nanding kuwang ko naman, dala niya pa rin yung pagiging business-minded niya, makakuha niya lahat, matalino si Miriam, pero masyado siyang brutal, mahirap gampanan ni Ramos ang pagiging presidente dahil nag-umpisa siya sa military.
Maraming salamat sa lahat ng mga nagmamasid at nakikiisa sa ating pagtitipon ngayong araw na ito. Welcome to Daang Dokyu. Reality check, perception is real, truth is not. Please welcome our guests. Umpisa natin, the Faculty Regent of UP Diliman and the Philippine and Southeast Asian Studies Scholar, Professor Ramon Guillermo. Professor Guillermo.
Magandang pagbati sa inyo lahat, mga tagapakinig at tagapanood ngayong gabi.
Our next guest is a film scholar, writer, and filmmaker. One of his documentaries, made in Singapore, is in this week's lineup. Professor Clodoaldo Doy del Mundo Jr. Hi, Doy.
Hi, boy. Kumusta?
Mabuti naman. Ikaw, kumusta?
Good.
Okay. Our next guest is a filmmaker and director of many landmark films, including Imelda, which we screened in September. Her newest film is 1,000 Cuts. Ramona Diaz.
Hi, boy. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being with us. And of course, our next guest is a sociologist from the University of Canberra and the editor of the Duterte Reader, na huli kong nakita ay sabi nga niya, hindi pa presidente si President Duterte, Nicole Corato. Hi, Nicole.
Hello po, pagbati sa lahat ng nanonood.
Sa lahat ng mga nanonood, you can share your opinions, post your questions on our Daang Dokyu social media pages. Kaya pwede ho kayong makisalamuha sa ating pag-uusap na ito. And today's flashback is co-presented by the concerned artist of the Philippines. Maraming salamat na the Philippine LGBT Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much. And I'd like to say hi to the students and faculty members of Miriam College, Ateneo de Manila, Biliran National High School, malapit ito sa amin, PUP, San Carlos University, and Davao National High School. Sa lahat sa inyo, maraming salamat. Dito natin umpisahan. Ano ba ang documentary as a genre? At sino ba ang documentarist? At anong papel niya sa kwento ng bayan at ng mamamayan? Professor Guillermo, let's start with you.
Karaniwang sinasabi na ang dokumentaryo ay nagpapakita ng mga tunay na pangyayari. Parang malapit sa balita, pero hindi tulad ng balita na talagang mga kasulukuyang mga nangyayari. Ang dokumentaryo ay pwedeng matagal ang proseso ng paggawa at matagal din yung pag-conceptualize. At siguro ang isa pang kakayahan ng dokumentaryo kumpara sa balita ay pwedeng mas malalim ang ipakita niyang pagsusuri sa mga manonood. Pwedeng, at maliban din sa balita, ay pwedeng magkaroon ng komentaryo, pwedeng magkaroon ng konting katuwaan, pwedeng may mga biro, pwedeng may talas ang kanyang suri. Kaya ang dokumentaryo ay may pagkakaiba sa simpleng pagbabalita o pagpapakita ng kasulukuyang mga nangyayari. Kaya yun siguro yung isang katangian nito. Ngayon pa man, natin mga pelikula. Yung pelikula ay siguro masabi nating tunay na o ganap na fictional. Ang dokumentaryo ay hindi talaga aalagwa patungo sa talagang pure fiction. Kailangan itong tumungtong pa rin sa realidad at saka sa mga kaganapan ng panahon.
Ramona, may nais ka bang idagdag? At siguro ituloy na natin doon as to who is the documentarist at ano ang kanyang papel sa kwento ng bayan at ng mga mamamayan?
I can only speak to what I do as a documentary filmmaker. No? So I am not, I add to what journalists do. So as a documentary filmmaker...
You add what journalists do. Okay.
Yeah, so I don't replicate. So I'm not a journalist. I'm not a journalist making films. I add to what they do. So what I do is I film behavior, right? I film attitude. So more akin to ethnography, but not ethnography, because I take then the footage and I craft it and use the tools of cinema, the language of cinema, to craft a film. So what is that? Like music, different shots, different close-ups, wide shots, editing. So what I'm giving you is a mediated experience. There's nothing objective about it. I don't pretend to be objective. I am giving you an experience of what I've experienced. So it's mediated. That's what I do. So hopefully it adds to what journalists do, because usually they say, well, it's journalistic. It really isn't.
Okay.
So that's what I do.
Okay. Doy, from the lens, from the prism of a filmmaker, may nais ka bang sabihin, Doy, at itawid natin doon sa role ng documentarist vis-a-vis the story of the nation and its people?
Well, the role of the documentary filmmaker is quite close to the role of the journalists. Both of them are after the truth, or at least a truth about historical reality. Maybe a major difference is that the documentary filmmaker is not just there to document an event, but to tell a story. So the documentary filmmaker looks for a narrative about a historical reality. So it has affinities with the different genres, the fiction films and journalistic news. The documentary filmmaker also tells a narrative, a story, and hopefully at the end, the documentary filmmaker would be able to share with the audience a truth about a historical reality that he or she has witnessed.
Okay. Historical narrative. Nicole, puntahan lang kita kasi kanina yung sinabi nga ni Ramona, what she does is mediated. She does not pretend to be objective. And then Doy started to talk about the truth. Your take on this? I mean, kasi yung titulo nga ng ating pag-uusap na ito, this engagement is about perception is real, truth is not. Nicole?
Yes. Actually, I agree with Ramona. For me, a documentary is a shared experience. It's an experience in the sense that there's the filmmaker who shares his or her experience to the audience, but also the audience engages the documentary, which is also shared by other audiences. Pero sumasang-ayon din ako kay Doy when he said na it's a version of reality, because I think a documentary is a truth claim. It should never assert that it's the single truth out there because we bore witness to that version of truth. But I think, it's a provocation to a conversation. It's an invitation to extend the national narrative as portrayed in the documentary.
Okay.
Can I also say that we should differentiate between truth and fact, right? Yeah. There are facts and there are truth. So I'm also guided by values of journalism. Like I will not ever say it's nighttime when it's daytime. I won't ever change certain facts about the characters I follow. So I think they're very different, right? A truth is like there's emotional truth, there's literal truth, but facts are facts. It's raining outside, it's raining outside. It's nighttime, it's nighttime. So I think we should differentiate between the two.
Okay, just to build on it, when you talk about the truth, ako bilang manonood ng moving images, hindi lamang ng dokumentaryo at iba pang visual media, paano ko nalalaman kung ang isang dokumentaryo ay nagsasabi nga nung, a part of the truth or nagsasabi ng facts? How would I know? Anybody can answer.
I think, Boy, that you just have to trust the documentary filmmaker that he or she is telling the truth, a truth about an experience of a historical reality.
Doy, I'm sorry, but para lamang klaro, but is that to say na lahat ng documentarists ay qualified? I mean, who's a documentarist? I mean, may lisensya ba ito? Meron ba tayong listahan ng mga iginagalang? Meron ba kaming basehan kung ito kapanipaniwala ito?
Well, the documentary filmmaker believes in some principles, right? Like sharing his or her view of a historical reality, and that for him, and to deliver a truth, right? And if there are filmmakers who go against that belief or that principle, then that filmmaker is committing an aberration of what the documentary film is all about.
Right.
Like journalists, journalists have their principles, to deliver the truth about an event, and there are those who say that they practice journalism, but they are trolls. They are not after the truth, or they don't present facts, as Ramona would say. And they're an aberration of the work of journalists. They're an aberration of the principles of journalism. Yeah. So documentary filmmakers would also stand by that ideal of presenting a truth about a historical reality.
Okay. I say this, Doy, kasi pag merong, hindi lahat, pero may mga tao, halimbawa, and there's this general perception that the documentary is more credible. Kung gusto ko maging credible, gagawa ako ng isang documentary. Professor Guillermo, dito pumapasok that it's also open to propaganda. Diretsahin na natin, halimbawa, yung elements of revisionism. Pag pinag-uusapan natin yung pagtanaw natin, halimbawa sa nakaraan. What is your take on this? That pag pinag-uusapan natin yung pagtanaw natin, halimbawa sa nakaraan. What is your take on this? That
documentary makes sense to me, the next question we have to ask is, why does it make sense to me? Why does it resonate with me? What are my political beliefs? What are my social conditions that allow this documentary to speak to me? So even if people watch the same documentary, even if they have varying interpretations of the quality of truth that documentary puts forward, hindi natin pwedeng gawing arbiters yung audience in terms of the objective quality of that documentary. We can be arbiters of our own reception of how the documentary makes sense in our world. So I think mas introspective yung sa akin na we have to be self-critical with the way we receive the messages of these films.
Okay, Doy, I want to go to the questions because it seems like I think we all agree that documentaries provoke, engage people in discussion, and it's good to ask questions. Pero the reality also is that lalo na, I mean, this may be not a fair observation, pero parang hindi tayo open masyado sa pagtatanong. Where is it coming from? Na pag nagtanong ka, kalaban. Na pag nagtanong ka, hindi mo naiintindihan. Na pag nagtanong ka, you're provoking gulo. Students are eavesdropping on this conversation. Can you talk about it, Doy?
Well, there's one scholar of the documentary who says that the documentary is susceptible to the question, might it be lying? Pag meron tayong pinanood na documentary, the film is always susceptible to that question, might it be lying? We don't ask that question with, fiction films, the feature films that we see in the theaters, because we know that these feature films are imagined and fantastic, and that it's all a lie, right? It's all set up by the studios and the actors and the directors, etc. But the documentary film is always susceptible to that question. And we may have that question, but we trust that the filmmaker, again, the documentary filmmaker, we trust that he or she is showing us a truth. If not, then if there is that question, nagging question, might it be lying? Then we have to be more active viewers, right? To do our research or to ask questions and to talk about it. The documentary film should not be a finished film, on the screen. After watching it, that's it. We don't even talk about it. No, the documentary film needs to be talked about and argued, and because the film is not a finished one. The audience, the viewers have to do something about the film and finish it.
Okay. Professor
Tito,
Guillermo,
may pwede magdagdag yan?
Go ahead. Pero
sa kasing
Guillermo, idagdag mo na rin yung, kasi maganda yung usapan natin doon sa mga lying, no? Sa mga documentarists ba, meron mga bagay na deliberately ino-omit, deliberately iniiwasan, at bakit hindi ito documentary as a genre? Bakit hindi ito nakakakuha ng atensyon mula sa big media? Hindi naman totally, no? Pero can you address that?
Anong hindi nakukuha ng atensyon, yung documentary?
It's not given enough attention in media.
Okay. Siguro, na-discuss kanina yung usapin ng audience, ano? Kasi, totoo, ang audience ng isang form, katulad ng documentary, hindi yan hindi passive. No? But audiences can also be constructed through a process of feedback, communication. Ano? Kaya isabihin, ang isang audience, nagde-develop din yan through the production of documentaries. May mga masabi siguro tayo, may mga cultures, for example, with a very strong tradition of making very good documentaries. You know? We might see some, for example, BBC, for example, would there be a kind of would have developed a great high level and high quality tradition of making documentaries. Ito ay nakaka-produce na audience din. Audience na merong mas mataas na antas ng discernment kaugnay ng mga documentaries. They will have higher expectations from documentaries if a culture has that kind of prevalence, no, of documentaries, and also yung pagpapahalaga sa mga dokumentaryo kung merong ganyang tradisyon sa isang lipunan. Sa palagay ko, napakaganda ng ganitong klaseng festival of films ng documentaries ngayon, no? Dapat mas maraming manood nito dahil talagang nakakabukas ng mata ng mga tagapanood. At ito yung paraan para din maging mas mapansin, ano, sa mas malawak na publiko ang mga ginagawa ng mga dokumentarista. Bagamat meron ding mga advantages ang kasalukuyang panahon kahit ngayon. Nakaka-zoom tayo, may marami. People can actually watch many good documentaries online. And this is a good development. Kasi noon, halimbawa, napanood ko yung Rusting of Leaves na documentary, hindi talagang hindi pinapalabas. Ano? Nobody could watch it. Ano? Ngayon lang yung first time na pinalabas sa Pilipinas officially ang Rusting of Leaves. Noong araw, they had to watch it through underground film showings, etc. Pero ngayon ay mas marami ng posibilidad na makapanood ang mga Pilipino ng mga magagaling na mga, lalo na ang gawa ng mga dokumentaristang Pilipino. Ano? At yung nais kong idagdag kanina, ano, ay parang may kinalaman sa sa teachers and sa pedagogical aspect, ano? Sa pedagogical aspect ng documentary. Dahil teacher ako, no? Alam ko naman na nabanggit niyo, Tito Boy, kanina yung problema ng pagtatanong, ano, ng mga estudyante. At yung isang dahilan kung bakit may mga hindi tatanong ng mga estudyante ay dahil din sa kultura ng pagtuturo, kultura ng edukasyon. Hindi ito kasalanan na ng mga guro, ano? Ito ay isang buong sistema na umiiral sa atin. At yung mga documentaries natin, mga teachers yan, no? And they want to teach, ano? And like good teachers, they want to have good methods for teaching. And doon sa mga documentaries na pinanood natin, a lot of them, after watching it, talagang umiiling-iling ako. A lot of it, after watching them, parang I was sort of feeling na ganun pala yun, ano? It sort of it shocked me. Ano, kumbaga, may mga images na pinakita. May mga questions in the recent documentary which made me feel uneasy, which made me feel that I had to look at things again. Ano? Kaya yun yung I think pinaka-compelling na mga documentaries, at maganda yung mga piniling mga documentaries para sa festival na to. After watching them, you feel you're not the same. Ano? You feel that you were shaken up. Ang mga kabataan ngayon sabihin nila, I was shook, ano, sabihin ng mga estudyante ko. Ano? Dahil sa dokumentaryo na yan, dahil sa mga images na ipinakita. If you finish watching a documentary and nothing happened like that, I think there might be a problem with your documentary, or it might be a simple documentary, showing, for example, people how to cook something or what. No? Hindi naman kinakailangan masyadong problema doon. Pero kung political documentaries and historical, tulad ng ating mga ginagawa ngayon, talagang may malaking responsibility for yung pedagogical aspect of our documentaries. Yeah. This is a very clear point. Continue to discover, yes.
Okay. Ramona, punta tayo dun sa yung may observation nga na there are stories na iniiwasan. There are stories that are omitted by storytellers, by documentarists. Is that a function of your not being objective? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Your thoughts?
You mean choosing certain subjects over others, or omitting certain aspects of the story that you're making?
Aspects of the story, because you cannot have all in a certain material, for example.
To me, that is just a form of film, right? Or the time limits of 90 minutes. Usually I make 90-minute films. It's like a thesis. You really have to figure out what story you're telling and craft a story that makes it cohesive. So something's bound to not be included in the film.
Ramona, it's not born out of, I'm sorry, it's not born out of a bias. I'm talking about
maybe subconscious bias too, right? I mean, like for example, an example is 1,000 Cuts, right? I filmed many characters, but the way I film is immersive. I stay with my characters for a long time, over a year, over months, and as the story unfolds, someone becomes the center of gravity of the story, and so characters fall through the wayside, even if I've filmed them a lot. And then you get to the edit room, and it's very, and this is seldom talked about in documentaries, but there is a thing as casting in documentaries.
Okay.
It's also who takes the light, right? Who is, even if you have a great story to tell, if you're not a great storyteller, that's a 5-minute YouTube clip, right? It's not a full-length film. So there's so many things that are beholden to the form of film and to the form and to your time limit. But there was also one other thing that I wanted to put in the mix in terms of lying and truth, not truth, is what do you do with an unreliable narrator, right? An unreliable character. That's a whole other consideration. How do you deal with that? My very first film was about a very unreliable narrator, Imelda Marcos. She was telling stories that I did not know whether it was true or not, but they were fascinating stories. And it said more about her character than the story itself, right? Did Irving Berlin really compose a story, a song for her? Not so much, right? I mean, but it's so unlikely that Irving Berlin would have composed a song, but I included it in the film, and fashion, and hopefully that people really got that it was not very reliable, that story, based on context, right? It's a context of the whole film. You see that maybe she's not very reliable. But I like the story because it's such a fascinating story, and it's more about her character than the story itself.
Okay, got that. Doy, people are talking now about impact documentaries. We hear of this in a different language when we do commercial films, no? Kailangan may connect ka sa audience. Kailangan nakakatawid ka doon sa iyong manunood. Let's talk about you as a documentarist and the impact. Do you have that in mind as you do your film, your documentary?
I don't think so. You know, when I guess when someone works on a project, the main objective is to do that project and finish it, without thinking about the marketing aspect or reaching or how you create an impact on audiences. Unlike commercial films, where at the very outset the marketing and the distributors are in the planning stage itself, how to create an impact. But there are I guess the documentary filmmaker has just to make sure that he or she reaches an audience. I remember a film by Dizzy Carolino about Bunso, a young boy who is imprisoned with adult prisoners. So that film reached some policymakers, and it made an impact because they did a bill. They passed a bill that would separate the young prisoners from the adult prisoners. So that had an impact on the subject that she dealt with in that film. So it's a matter of, I guess, how you use the film later on, to gain that impact. But while doing it, I don't think that the documentary filmmaker thinks of the impact that it would create. Of course, I guess he or she is hopeful that film would create an impact, but that's not in the process of doing the film. Yeah.
Okay. Nicole, somebody once said to me, among other things, a documentary is supposed to initiate a better understanding of the past. In reference, among other things that a documentary does. In the context of that understanding of the past, how do you assess our documentaries?
I think one way to talk about our documentaries is how fragmented the stories of this nation are. Na parang we can see the diversity of stories being told. So, for example, the Imelda example, it's the same film people can watch, but people can interpret that story differently. Probably for some people, Imelda is actually a reliable narrator because she tells a story of the past that resonates today to some people. So I think the way we assess how our documentaries today talk about the past is whether it bridges the conversations of people who are coming from different perspectives. We may not agree in the end, but the documentary becomes that bridge for us to come together and begin that conversation.
Okay, this is for Joy and Ramona. Paano ba gumawa ng documentaries? Ano bang nauuna sa proseso? Storya, shooting? Sino bang nag-finance ng documentaries? Can you bring us there? How do you do your documentaries? Ramona, please. And then we go to Joy.
Yeah, so I live in the States, right? So I produce my films here, but I shoot most of my films, most of them in the Philippines. So I raise money here, and it's a combination of grants, which what we call soft money, and in equity investment, which is really
the Philippines, Ramona.
No, from here.
From
I live here. So yeah, from here. So there are grants, soft money. So basically, the soft money, it's outright. You don't have to give it back, right? It is an outright grant to you. And then there is equity investment, which is becoming very popular now in documentaries here in the US, where there are actual investors in film, and they get there's a waterfall at the end. They get their money back, and then plus, right? Plus points. So it is and then there's public money, because we have from public television. Public television gives money here. So it's a combination. You sort of put all those sources together to finance a film. That's what happens.
Do you earn big money in documentaries?
No. I mean, if you want to earn money, don't do documentaries. But I always make it a point to pay myself. Like I do have a budget. I like I like paying people. I like paying the crew. I think that's important because this is it has to be sustainable. So I never start a film without some kind of financing, because I do like I do like paying myself and the people that I work with.
So in other words, you are part of the budget. I get that
Yes.
sense. Doi, what is your process as a filmmaker?
I think a very important thing is that there's a subject that resonates with the filmmaker, and that he connects with, or he empathizes with, or he finds very important, to devote his part of his life, to do a film. And unless it is a sponsored film, that's a different thing. But usually, I think many of the films that we've seen in this week's Daang Dokyu, I guess were done by the filmmakers because of their connection with the subject that they filmed. About financing, in my case, with Made in Singapore, I worked on it on a zero budget. Yeah, because I did it while I was in Singapore then teaching, and during my free time, I would shoot the film, especially during weekends when there were a lot of Filipina domestic helpers, on a day off. It was on a zero budget. I hope that the film doesn't look like it was done on a zero budget, but yeah. So it's a different thing, where the financing comes from.
Don't we have grants in the country, in the Philippines?
Well, sometimes you get grants from the NCCA or the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, or the Film Development Council. But usually our filmmakers go outside, go abroad to look for grants. If you look at Alex Ain Arumpak's film, Aswang, you would see all the agencies that supported her film. Yeah.
Okay.
Our present filmmakers, the young ones, they're very aware of where to get these grants. They're very, good at it.
So the both of you, mabilisan lamang. So why do you do documentaries?
Why do I do documentaries? Okay. For me personally, there's an attraction to something that is real. I see real events or real people and real issues, and I'm attracted to it. I don't have to imagine stories.
Okay.
Although I've done it in some films. But one thing interesting with the documentary is that the subject is out there, and it's very important. And we have to do something about it and shoot it, to share our view or our argument with other people.
Ramona, why do you do documentaries?
I love the process of documentary filmmaking. My films are usually life unfolding in front of the lens, and I don't know where it's gonna go. Right? It's almost it's a crazy way to make a film. Actually, and you have to be very zen because you don't know. Right? It's gonna lead you to wherever. So you're always like, it might be the abyss. Who knows? But it's exciting for me. I like doing that.
Ramona, you don't know where it's gonna go because you don't work on a script. You basically work on a concept, a story, and then it just unfolds as you're doing the film.
Exactly. So it may be that it can land very many different ways. So, and I always say what's good for the people I'm filming is not necessarily good for my film. So an example, like if Arnel Pineda did not succeed with Journey, better for my film, because failure is really more interesting in a film because then you watch how they overcome it. But I didn't want him to fail. I wanted him to succeed as a person, as a friend. You know what I'm saying? So yes. It's almost going against my self-interest to root for him. But, it was a Cinderella story. He succeeded. And so that's how the film is. I love the process. I love collaborating with my crew and my editor. I love it's like how the sausage is made. I truly love it. I truly love it.
Nicole and Professor Guillermo, from your point of view, I'll go back to Doy and to Ramona about this. Ano yung mga pinakamalalaking challenges ng dokumentaryo sa ating bayan?
Well, nabanggit na rin kanina, sa tingin ko yung audience, I think it's a very demanding genre. It's not something...
Nicole, sino ba ang audience ng documentary?
Exactly the point, right? Especially if hindi siya required sa school, if hindi woke, kumbaga, yung audience, parang there's...
Woke and woke, okay.
Oh, diba? Pero, so I think that's one challenge. Sabi nga ni Professor Guillermo, hindi naman tayo sanay sa ganitong genre, unlike they are in the UK, where the BBC kind of socialized the audience to appreciate a medium like this. And also, I think, meron din kasing question of the format, the ways in which we consume media at the moment, diba? Na masanay tayo sa short films, masanay tayo na hindi sa cinema na pinapanood, lalo na ngayon dahil pandemic, pwede siyang i-pause, pwede kang tumigil sandali, pwedeng mawala yung concentration. So I guess it's not just the question of who watches it, but how we watch it. And parang it changes the way we appreciate the format as well. Kasi ang daling mag-tune out. Pag ang bigat, ayoko na, hindi ko na to tatapusin. Whereas if you're in a theater, wala kang choice, di ba? Papanoorin mo yan, whether we're talking about torture or we're talking about journey. You are sharing an experience with people around you, but if you're watching it by yourself, in your living room, it's so easy to quit. Exit is an option. Okay. Professor Guillermo, challenges, audience?
Ayaw kong i-trivialize ang ginagawa ng ating mga magaling na mga documentaries. Pero sa katunayan, kung pinaralan natin yung ilang mga documentaries, halimbawa yung 50 years ng ABS-CBN, makita nyo yung logistical and technical problems at the time to actually film moving subject matter. Kumbaga, yung unang mga camera na ginamit para sa kanilang mga television stations, you needed two or three people to carry those cameras. Tapos, by the 80s, of course, nag-develop na yung ating mga mas handheld equipment na ginagamit natin. I think it created also a revolution in documentary filmmaking. Yung sinabi nga ni Sir Doy kanina, he was actually able to make a documentary in Singapore on a zero budget, using probably VHS or some other medium, na mas portable, So ngayon, everybody has these cameras on their phones, Everybody actually has these devices, So starting from the perspective of production, for example, of documentary film production, I think ang laki ng potential ngayon na maka-encourage tayo ng mas maraming mga kabataan na gumawa talaga ng mga documentaries. And the job of our very good documentaries is to set a standard to help train our young people to make documentaries. Of course, because of the ubiquity of cameras, and not all of this will be worth watching. Pero I think a lot of it will be may mga talents talaga na that will have opportunities to to make their own thing, So yun ang isang bagay. So sa production side ng documentaries, I think we can actually have a lot more production. Yung mga guro sa mga eskwelahan, pwede magkaroon sa mga eskwelahan ng mga let's say at workshops, let's say with our great documentaries, and also festivals of documentaries na ginawa ng mga estudyante, conversations, documentaries. I think this is a good time to do this, and this will also help offset yung problem of all these very bad or fake documentaries na ginagawa ngayon.
Okay, Ramona, let's go to the audience. Who is your audience? When you do your documentary, do you have an audience in mind, Ramona?
I always say my first audience is me. If I'm interested in it, if I get surprised by my story, I always feel there is someone out there who will get surprised like I am. But talking about audience, boy, I think the documentary form is evolving. and it's becoming at least here. I mean, you know, witness Netflix, right? There's so many not only one-offs, what we call, you know, a 90-minuter, but documentary series like Tiger King and all the true crime documentaries. So I think those attract a more mainstream audience. So the taste for documentaries are changing. It's becoming more stream. I think it was harder to get to that because documentaries have always had the reputation for being like vegetables. You have to eat your vegetables. You know, it's like hard to watch because it has its roots in dry educational films and, you know, stuff like that. Those are the roots of the documentary. But now it's evolving and gaining a bigger audience, I think. But as far as my audience, I always feel like the audience will come if I am telling a compelling story. And if it's compelling to me, I hope it's compelling to someone else, right? I hate to pander to an audience. I always think that I have to respect my audience. I have to respect that they're smart and that they'll get it.
Okay.
Because I think if you underestimate them, then it's deadly.
Okay. So Ramona, what is your benchmark of success? What is your benchmark of success?
If I sell the film. So here, my benchmarks have been where I premiere, right? Because it really matters where documentaries here premiere. So where you premiere is key because then it sort of, it dictates the life of the film after. So if you premiere at Sundance, that dictates the life of the film more easily. So, and then if I sell it, if it gets on broadcast, to me because that means I can do my next film. It's always to me about the next film.
All right. Okay. Doy, let's go to the audience. And I wanted to get your comment on ang dokumentaryo ay parang gulay. Alam mo yun, pinipilit kang kainin in the beginning. It's dry, but it is evolving, sabi ni Ramona. And then, do you think of your audience? I mean, did you think of your audience when you were doing Made in Singapore?
Well, for that particular film, I just wanted to share what I saw in Singapore with the Filipinos, my fellow countrymen in Manila or in the Philippines, para makita nila yung nakita ko. But I think I work like an indie filmmaker. You know, when you do an indie film, usually you don't think about the audience. You just worry about finishing the film. You know, that's why the benchmark for success is when you finish the film. And hopefully somebody picks up the film and watches it or distributes it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Nicole, yung role ng dokumentaryo, katulad ng sinabi ko sa umpisa, at kung ilalagay mo yung kwento ng bayan, kwento ng tao, saan natin pinagdudugtong yan? And where are we in that sense?
Yeah, so I think dito hihiram ako sa parang sobrang classic sociological concept, di ba? It's the connection between biography and history. It's the connection between individual and society. I think that is why compelling documentaries are documentaries that give the perspective not just of the filmmaker, but of a particular character that we often take for granted. So a while ago, I was talking about Aswang, na ang storyteller dun sa Aswang ay isang bata na hindi naman directly related sa Tokhang. It's just incidentally nandun siya at makakatropa niya yung nabiktima ng Tokhang. And that to me is powerful because it invites that individual whom we otherwise would not meet if it weren't for that documentary to go to our screens oftentimes in the privacy of our homes. And I think that is the power of documentary in nation building. It connects disparate communities. It connects imaginary communities together in a mediated format.
And to tell a story, di ba?
Yes.
Professor Guillermo?
Siguro I can only answer siguro in an empirical way, ano, dun sa napanood kong mga dokumentaryo na inihanay dito sa festival, sa ating session ngayon, ano. At nakita ko ron, ano, doon sa mga documentaries, I think a lot of these documentaries, they revolve around a very major historical event, At makita nyo nga yun talagang yung turning point, At least for most of the documentaries that we watched, ay yung EDSA, Yung question of dictatorship and what happened after the dictatorship. The documentaries, they were all different documentaries. They were discussing different aspects of individuals' histories, but they inevitably, or they were all turning around this historical turning point in the Philippines, parang unavoidably, and so that's why all of these documentaries are, because they could not avoid, or in fact they were facing the centrality of this event, and still up to the present, up to this moment, still trying to make sense of that historical turning point in Philippine history, Marami pang ibang bagay na makikita doon, and I think that was one theme na makikita doon. But also one aspect that I saw dito sa documentaries na ito was also a technological turning point. That I felt it was rather poignant for me, because you can actually mark, the time before the internet, before cell phones.
Ang nakikinig sa ating pag-uusap. I'll go to you, Nicole Andoy. Kanina we were starting to talk about the responsibility also of our audience. Ito ang tanong, ako'y estudyante, wala naman akong kakayanan halimbawa mag-produce ng aking documentary, but there's this desire to be part of the storytelling. How do I contribute, to the narrative? How do I contribute as a student to the storytelling process? Nicole, and then I'll go to Doy.
Ako, embrace your medium. Sobrang naaasar ako to people who dismiss digital media as a space for voice and storytelling. People who are so elitist against TikTok porque ang ikli-ikli lang ng time allowed in TikTok. But increasingly, we also see these digital technologies, despite issues of algorithm, despite issues of surveillance capitalism, there is still space for, some of the interesting TikTok videos, for example, are makeup tutorials that draw our attention to how Uyghurs in China are oppressed. Diba? And I think these are very creative, not very serious, but communicative ways for young people to use their mobile phones for them to experiment on the genre of storytelling. So sa tingin ko, magandang ma-embrace yung democratization of storytelling platforms right now while remaining fully cognizant of the limits of the platform.
Okay. Doy?
Yeah, well, I think students don't have any excuse today, not to be able to make the films that they want to make. And they have to take advantage of the fact that they have access to the medium, mobile phones even, to make their films. So, but first they have to be connected with what's happening, around us. If they're disconnected and just absorbed with themselves, I don't think that should be the attitude, right? Especially with what's happening today, the pandemic. So, if we don't learn a lesson here, and for example, the young ones don't get connected to the real problems that we're facing, then there is a major problem. But I hope that they would be connected with what's happening around them, and they do their part, to tell their kind of a story that they want to tell based on their experience of what's happening around them. Yeah.
Okay. Professor Guillermo, na-mention nga ni Doy yung pandemic. Paano ba maapektuhan ang ating kwento bilang bayan nitong pandemic na ito?
Sa ngayon, siyempre, ongoing yung kwento na ito. Sa katunayan, hindi paano matatapos ang kwento ng pandemic, hindi lang sa Pilipinas, kundi sa sa buong daigdig. At siyempre pwedeng isang patingin sa pandemic o yung ating pagtalakay sa kasaysayan o karanasan ng pandemic. Pwedeng mula doon sa pribilehiyadong posisyon. Na okay, nasa bahay lang ako, nakaka-board dito, nanonood lang ako ng Netflix, tuloy-tuloy lang, ganyan, o kaya hindi na ako lumalabas, nag-zoom na ako palagi, Pwedeng ganoon yung ating maging mga problema, kaugnay ng pandemic ngayon. Pero isipin natin, maraming mga taong kinakailangan lumabas, maraming kinakailangan maghanap ng trabaho, kabuhayan, napakarami nang nawala ng trabaho ngayon. Talagang bagsak na bagsak, at walang makitang ang maraming mga tao. Kaya kailangan sa isang banda madokumento ng ating mga dokumentarista na mga gumagawa ng mga naratibo natin ng mga nangyayari. Merong mga inisyatiba dyan, halimbawa sa mga writers, merong mga inisyatiba ng pagsusulat ng mga kwento o ng mga kahit mga nobela tungkol sa kasulukuyang mga nangyayari sa pandemiko. Kailangan maitala itong sa katunayan napakamakasaysayan na panahon ng ating nilang, and this is very global, this is very global, of course with very specific issues in each country. At siyempre ang Pilipinas ngayon ay masasabi natin isang napaka-problematikong lugar kung pandemiko ang usapin. Kumbaga pandemic hotspot. At wala pa tayong makitang ganap na solusyon sa hinaharap. So I think aside from another issue dito sa pandemic na ito, ay usapin na psychological trauma na dinaranas ng maraming kabataan ng mga ngayon. And I think this is something that we should really we should document this trauma, this very traumatic event. And I think this also appeals to a lot of documentaries. Documentaries have to deal with many traumatic events and have to help societies come to terms with these traumas. So napakalaki ng trabaho na kinakailangan gawin ng ating mga dokumentarista, ng mga gumagawa ng mga naratibo, mga salaysay, mga social scientists natin. This is a lot of work, and we don't see at the end, but we will help. If we do our work, we can help see this to the end.
Maraming salamat. Narito isang katanungan mula sa Facebook, and I'd like Ramona to address this, from Aaron Medina. There are good and critical documentaries which do not get into wider public attention. On the other hand, revisionist propaganda through vlogs are gaining some traction. How do legit documentaries and documentarists compete for public attention versus the revisionist environment?
Are they equal in getting attention? I'm not aware that they are, right? So I think my reality here is that there are the real legitimate documentaries, and that there are the documentaries that are in a way propaganda, and it's very obvious, right? There are propaganda films that are, say, in my reality here, for Trump, right? And it's very clear that that's a different kind of propaganda. I'm not sure that they're equal, and I'm not sure that they're getting equal weight and equal attention. In my lived reality, legitimate documentaries are gaining more ground. They even call it the golden age of documentary filmmaking here.
Mm-hmm.
Not for everyone, it's not equal, right? It's not equal for everyone. If you have access to resources, it's probably the golden age of documentary. Yeah, so I'm not sure I answered your question, but I don't think that they're of equal footing.
Okay, you got that. Doy, may nais kang idagdag doon sa katanungan?
Yeah, I don't think any questionable film or a revisionist film is included in Daang Dokyu. Okay, I guess they've done their work, and they've chosen the films that should be shown. Yeah, and I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay, Professor Guillermo, go ahead.
Yun gusto ko kasing idagdag kaugnay nitong usapin nga ng mga revisionist documentaries or material, no, that we can see in the internet. Ang isa kasing katangian ano nitong medium ng social media ay yung nga tinatawag natin mga echo chamber, no? 'Di ba? Na yung mga tao na, di ba, in fact, it was quite gradual for me, this phenomenon na yung balita ko, hindi din ako nasa social media, ano? Dati masipag pa ako. Pupunta ako na sa mga sites of the news, of the newspapers, right? Generally. For example, even Rapper Inquirer, no? Titignan ko muna yung kanilang site, tapos babasa ng balita ron. Pero ngayon, parang, I let social media do the thing for me. No? If something pops up in social media from Rapper or something that's interesting, babasahin ko rin yun, no? But I hardly go directly to the news sites themselves, no? Ngayon, dahil nga sa algorithm ng Facebook, things pop up which they expect you or to want to read, no? So this creates a kind of media echo chamber. At marami sa ating mga kababayan na, kung ako ay pro sa kasalukuyang presidente, ano? Tapos na-determine yan algorithmically, and also dahil ganito yung aking social media behavior, I can actually create a kind of curated library of images, no, that surround me, that only supports my own tendency, what I feel, and what I want to see and what I want to hear. Itong problema kasi ngayon ng kasalukuyang yung challenge, not a problem, but it's a challenge for people today. Pinapanood ko yung maraming documentaries, yung nakita niyo yung the age or the era before the internet, the age of or the era before cell phones, Nakita niyo more or less, we had, if we listen to music, people had their own machines, they were blaring their music, if you wanted movies or documentaries na maraming na-interest dyan, kasi pupunta yung mga kabataan doon, papanood nila. Kung may music, kahit paanong music yan kahit hindi nila masyadong type, napapakinggan nila sa paligid nila. But today, you can shut out everything that you don't want, and stay in your niche, stay enclosed in this cocoon that you created yourself of images, a cocoon of images. So ang problema dyan, how to break this, how to insert yourself into these cocoons. Kasi napansin ko sa social media studies na ginagawa ko, talagang not resistant, ang maraming tao na manood ng mga types of material na that would question their beliefs. They're not bad people, they're just ordinary Filipinos, but they have kumbaga palos merong reflex sila to sort of shut out. Mag-swipe to the right ka lang, wala na yun So easy to get rid of these things. So yun yung isang challenge ngayon, and if you compare yung era of those old documentaries to the current documentaries, it's a very challenging problem that we face.
Okay.
Go ahead. It's hard to get out of that bubble, right? Because the bubble has been created for you. It's really not of your making. It's been created for you by social media platforms. And very interesting thing to do is compare your feeds, right, with someone who is so unlike you, who somehow believes very different, has different political views, right? A DDS, for example, right? Compare your feeds, and it's so interesting because then you understand that you are trapped in your own bubbles. And then if you start sharing what each of you is getting, it's like a whole different world. Yeah. Not that you have to believe it, but it just shows you what they're being fed.
Got a point.
And you're being fed.
Okay. Balik ako sa dokumentaryo, Nicole. Meron bang isa, here's a question, what's a big and important story of our nation that may have been overlooked in the storytelling process of our storytellers? Meron ba?
I think it's the less spectacular form of tragedies that we observe. Ang daming documentaries about typhoons, volcanic eruption, revolutions, but what about the slow violence of poverty or the slow violence of drought? These are less spectacular forms of tragedies, and because they're so normalized and because they're so everyday, we overlook them. So I think some of the most powerful documentaries are those that can problematize what is taken for granted. But if I can just go back to yung sa question ni Aaron kanina about these the revisionist documentaries. Okay. I think my only comment here Yeah, I think my only comment here is they don't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a bigger ecosystem that normalizes that kind of narrative. We cannot isolate that revisionist documentary on martial law without the Philippine Tatler putting Amy Marcos in its front cover, without influencers making Sandro Marcos look cool. This is part of the cultural legitimation of the Marcoses as legitimate cultural actors in this country. So we cannot isolate the issue of revisionist documentary on its own. It's part of a broader cultural permissiveness of people that we think have sinned to the nation but have now been forgiven or forgotten or legitimized or even admired.
So having said that, what do I do as an audience, as a citizen? What do I do, Nicole?
I think it's important to be an irritating citizen right now, di ba? Na parang let's not hesitate to irritate other people when we find something is amiss with the way culture represents morally reprehensible actors. And I'm not being polemical here when I say morally reprehensible actors, because as we mentioned earlier, there are truths and there are facts. And there are facts that are derived from from the judgment of courts, right? So I think as citizens, that is my practical advice. Let's not hesitate to express disgust and discontent, kasi otherwise, manonormalize lang yung ganitong klaseng permissiveness.
Okay.
Boy, you were
ahead,
asking. Yeah, you were asking about the question what subject has not been covered.
Yes.
Or not properly covered. Yeah. Well, the ironic thing is that filmmakers or broadcast documentarists have dealt with subjects, a lot of times, right? That we need to know, like for example, the issue of poverty. I mean, that has been done a lot of times in documentaries and other forms of film, but the problem is hindi nakikita nung mga tao. Tinitignan. We did a film once, a documentary film. Tinitignan, hindi nakikita. The audience look at these problems every day, on TV and on films, but for some reason they don't see it.
Okay.
Tinitignan, hindi nakikita. Merong mata, pero hindi nakakakita.
Okay.
And
Nicole,
I don't know what the problem is. Yeah.
Okay. Nicole and Professor Guillermo, totoo ito, here's an observation. Hindi lamang sa dokumentaryo, kundi sa media sa pangkalahatan. Ano yung mga defining narratives, mga kwento of the past, and even of today, that dominate our perception of who we are as a country?
I think it's the logic of good versus evil, na very, parang, the way we tell our stories about the nation is always bad and the good will win over the bad. I think that logic should be overcome, and that's why I like documentaries that embrace the complexity of gray areas. Kasi doon tayo nagkakatalo eh. Kaya ngayon parang ang daling sabihin dilawan ka kasi pro-Aquino ka, as if EDSA is just about the Aquinos, right? So I think that is one weakness, I guess, of the national imaginary at the moment. It was built as if it's a question of binaries. And I think what we can learn from the Duterte regime, especially with recent polls that say this is a very popular government, I think there has to be a reckoning. Parang is the demonization, the good versus evil framing still an effective way of nation building, or that is comfortable with gray areas and comfortable with embracing difficult conversations? Because I don't think we can survive as a nation if our logic is always good versus bad.
Okay. Professor Guillermo, can you comment on that?
Gusto kong balikan ako bilang isang maliit na point lang yung natanong kanina tungkol sa ano yung overlook sa
sa pagkukwento
documentaries sa tingin ko, I agree with Sir Doy na ang problema talagang maraming ginagawa mga documentaries. I think it's the documentaries themselves that are being overlooked. No, it's not that documentaries overlook many things. In fact, they try to make a lot of documentaries about serious topics and very challenging themes. Pero the documentaries themselves are overlooked. Hindi nag-circulate sa nararapat na bilang ng mga tao. Kaya yun, may double layer of the issue of overlooking. I think that's two layers of it. Ngayon, yung ating mga documentaries, we have to say it, a lot of them are marginal or marginalized in the media, in the mainstream media. It's a kind of parang bulay, diba? Marginal siya, no? And yung marginality na to allows documentary filmmakers to raise more critical questions, which is not available, for example, in the more mainstream types of media. So there's a kind of pro and a con to it. On the one hand, napakahirap na makakuha ng malawak na audience kung ikaw ay documentaries. On the other hand, you have greater freedom to raise more bold questions, to challenge people to be more critical, right? At yun yung isang potential ng
Guillermo, susugan ko yan because this question is about that, no? Tungkol ito sa painting of the story of the nation and influencing national consciousness sa pamamagitan ng documentaries and media. Is it an equal playing field or are there forces and institutions that are more in control than others?
Yeah. So, totoo yan, no? As I was saying, may aspect of marginality. And one great thing about it is that pwede maging do-it-yourself. No? They can actually become good documentaries na talagang DIY ang kanilang approach, and they learn, and many of them learn by doing, actually, and become very good at the craft, and it's a kind of chosen positionality doon sa ating media system in a certain way, so that you can maintain some kind of independence, and ngayon, dahil nga sa ganitong katangian, what do I see in the documentaries that were shown, And nakita ko rito ay on the one hand, lalo na doon sa usapin ng mga historical documentaries natin, what I sort of felt about it was the fragility of the image, that these images, na noong araw, they could have been lost, or the possibility that they could have been taken was pretty random or contingent. Na may tao ron na pwedeng kumuha ng ganitong mga images, having brought a camera. Kaya and some of these documentaries na pinalabas, they were rather degraded. Yung iba, may mga problems na yung kanilang copies, So the image is very fragile, and they come to us from the past, from a history that it was almost a contingent thing that they were even taken. That these images are now available to us and are preserved, hopefully also for the future. Pero isa akong napansin doon sa maraming documentaries ito, aside from the fragility of the image, is the durability of Philippine social structure. The durability of the line between those with and without power. The durability of the line between those who are wealthy and those who are poor. The durability of the class structure in the Philippines, So this is what we can see in all the films that we saw, It's so stable, It's so fascinating how stable this durable line of power and powerlessness is in the Philippines.
All right.
And counterposed to that, the fragility of the medium that is used to convey this to the audience.
Ito'y may relasyon dyan sa iyong diskurso, Professor Guillermo. Nicole, very briefly lang, ito yung comment. A lot of these images we see in the Daang Dokyu selection about the nation are images na nakita na natin. The stories we already know, that we've seen in television, and yet when the audience watched them, like Aswang, when it premiered via free online screening, the reaction was still immediate, as if the story is fresh, when in fact thousands have already been killed in the drug war. Ang tanong, where can you locate this power of documentary as moving image?
Yes, I think it's because the medium personifies people that often are parang dehumanized in everyday life, right? Na parang when we talk about the drug war, we often talk about the drug war in terms of numbers, in terms of just another case. But I think what differentiates this story is it brings back the humanity to people that have already been dehumanized for so long.
Okay. Ramona, here's a question. Ano yung viability of documentaries and images in furthering meaningful change or its vulnerability to be controlled for political gain?
Okay, if I understand the question right, how do you use documentaries for change? Is that the question?
Viability of documentaries and images and furthering, yes, advancing meaningful change or its vulnerability to be controlled.
I think we go back to documentaries as provocations, right? As questioning, as a starting point to question what you're seeing, as a starting point to question history, as a starting point to question unfolding stories. I think that's how change happens. And documentaries, really, they shine a light on stories that you think you already know, like Aswang, the drug war, but we frame it in a way that immerses you in a person's life, that humanizes it, like Nicole was saying. That's why it's so different, that when you watch it in that form, you react differently, right? Okay. And to Nicole's point and this is really key, when she says it's not binary, it's really the gray areas. That's why I think documentary films that are more nuanced, are more complicated, they're also harder to watch, right? Because it takes work from the audience. But those are the films that documentaries should be out there, because those are the films that really provoke questions and answers and debate and discussion. And I think that's what's lacking in the public space right now. Real debate, real conversations that are not just left and right? Because then you'll never come to the middle. So I think good documentaries really provoke that and have a real robust, real discussions about what's past, what's present, and the future.
And features of gray area that Nicole was talking about. But can you go to the vulnerability of the platform that can be controlled for political gain?
Well, yeah, you see that, right? Let's start with social media. It's weaponized for political gain, right? It's seeded. That's what 1,000 Cuts, my current release, is about. How they weaponize social media against, say, the press, right? They seed words like prostitutes, and suddenly that word is part of the narrative. Like it is really a word and it's really a real thing when it was just invented. But, once you say something over and over and over again, it becomes real and it becomes truth. You forget that at some point that wasn't real because you normalize it. Mm-hmm. I think that's what social media does. They normalize something that may not necessarily be true. And people believe it. People will start believing, or it's not really believing one thing or another. It's just doubting what's true. Right? You doubt yourself. It's gaslighting. You doubt whether anything you hear is true, and that's deadly. If you lose your grounding in that way.
Okay. Ramona, just a quick question. Anything that you wouldn't touch as a documentarist?
Nothing.
Okay. All right. Doy, same question. Before I go to Professor Guillermo, meron bang ganun? Lahat ko ikukwento except.
Well, nothing comes to mind at the moment, but I think whatever I'm passionate about, what interests me, the subject has to connect with something inside me, and I would do it.
All right, Professor Guillermo, you wanted to say something?
Kaugnay nung political aspect ng documentaries, kasi we were looking at, for example, yung documentary ng Mendiola, o iba pang mga documentaries na
Massacre, yeah.
Nitong festival, noong mga panahon, of course, I was and I still am an activist, and nung panahon na yan, yung mga documentary, I had a feeling, and I sort of knew it, that yung mga documentaries, gumagawa kami ng mga maliit na film showing. In fact, yung mga maliit na film showing na yan ng mga activists, they're quite important for documentaries. Na, for example, kahit sa women's movements, sa LGBT community, so workers' movement, sa peasant movement, if someone makes a good documentary about their struggles, then I think they're a good audience for this kind of material. At nakita nila yung potential of this material. And what is the potential? And the potential is teaching. No? As a teacher, for example, naghahanap talaga ako ng mga materials na magagamit sa pagtuturo. And teaching as an activist is different from teaching as a teacher. Because if you're an activist, then you want, well, you can't force it, no? But we want things to create change. We want the image to drive change, diba? And I think some journalists also would like to do this, no? To use the image, to use the word to drive change in society. Kaya yung sa tingin ko, yung EDSA revolt, for example, the images were fundamental. The footages were fundamental. Without these images, without these footages, mas nabawasan ang potential for that very important historical event. So I think the images that documentaries create, that journalists put out there, they can actually function to jolt people, to make people desire transformation in their society. Kaya it's not just for questioning that people put out documentaries about the drug war. These documentaries about the drug war, they're critical material. They're meant to try to say, let's put a stop to this. Let's put a stop to this inhumanity and violence. So they want to motivate and mobilize people. So that's one particular political function that is very important of these images and documentaries.
Okay. All right. Nicole, I want to go to you. I want to build up on what Professor Guillermo talked about. Yung pagiging isang guro, yung kanyang attitude na gusto niya yung mga images and how he is affected as a teacher. No? Pero paano mo palalaganapin yan? How do you popularize that? How do you sell that attitude not just to 2, 3, 4 teachers, but to more teachers in this country? That's number one. And number two, yung images na sinasabi nga ni Professor Guillermo na nagbago ng pananaw ng ilang tao, halimbawa the EDSA images. But these are the same images that are used by dissenting halimbawa documentarists to prove another point. So bilang audience, saan ba ako lulugar? Let's go to the first question about the teachers, and then let's go to the same use of the same images to to deliver the same an opposing story. Nicole.
I think yung effectiveness for me ng teacher in this context is not to parang be the judge of the documentary for the student, to be the sole arbiter of what this image means. I think the
Nicole,
best
but
and
not even
most
a judge, but just that attitude to use these moving images to share it with like young students. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, of course. These images are very much part, especially now that teaching happens online. It's more visual. There are more opportunities to circulate these images. But I think beyond showing the image is this approach on how to teach the image, what the image means. And I think where I'm coming from is how we can democratize our interpretation of this image. Because if your image is about democracy, but the way you teach it is so authoritarian, it defeats the spirit of the image. We can use that image to facilitate a debate in class, to allow that as a trigger for children or students to engage in critical thinking. Bakit may tangke dyan? Bakit may madre dyan? Anong ibig sabihin yan? Let's learn how we interpret these image together rather than saying, ito totoo, ito fake, that's the truth. Parang, I think that's very difficult because doon na magkukulang yung pinag-uusapan natin kanina. We have students who stop asking questions. Because when we talk about democracy, the way we teach them is we ask them objective exams without necessarily teaching the skills of critical thinking and the democratic ethos that's necessary for democratic citizenship. So I think that's my, kumbaga, as a teacher myself, that is my approach to teaching, to use these images to facilitate conversation and encourage critical thinking. And if there are dissenting opinions, critical questions, revisionists in my class, I welcome it, but we also have to learn how to challenge each other.
Okay, let's go to the images that Professor Guillermo was talking about earlier. Halimbawa yung EDSA, di ba? Powerful images. Pero ito yung napapanood din namin doon sa mga ibang documentaries, halimbawa na nagsasabing, it didn't mean anything.
Yes, so let's bring that voice in the classroom and then let's challenge our students to debate that, or if they agree with that, to defend their views. I think the teacher can facilitate that debate and give the two sides of the story and then let the students decide. I think that is a more democratic way of saying it without forgetting the facts. And I think that is the important distinction. Nangyari to, ganitong araw, pinublish sa ganitong dyaryo, ito yung supporting facts. then let's understand the context where these pictures are portrayed, and let's have that discussion.
Doy, Professor Guillermo, sa ngayon ba sa setup natin sa ating edukasyon, ang mga guro ba tinutulungan para, kasi yung critical thinking, halimbawa to encourage, incite critical thinking, to encourage critical thinking mula sa mga teachers. How do we have teachers who can actually, do we have policies? I'm not even talking about government policies, but halimbawa yung mga eskwelahan, meron ba tayong mga programa na nakakatulong sa mga guro, halimbawa, to encourage critical thinking, disagreements, debates in the classroom? Meron ganon sa mga eskwelahan kung saan kayo nagtuturo?
Well, talagang ano yan aspiration ng lahat ng mga guro na mag-develop ng critical environment sa kanyang classroom. No? Ang problema lang talaga ay maraming mga obstacles, I mean, in general, At ngayon, halimbawa, the specific situations we're in, mga Zoom classrooms, ganyan. Talagang napaka-challenging nito kung critical. Napuputulan nga tayo ng internet, At saka nawawala-wala yung teacher, Napaka-problematic ng kasalukuyang sitwasyon. Pero sa ordinaryong sitwasyon dati, talagang minority, napaka-minority ng given yung pressures, I mean, we're not saying this is a teacher, this is a student, this is a kind of a whole educational infrastructure that we have to overhaul para magkaroon tayo to encourage critical thinking. And one thing that really went against the development of the emphasis on critical thinking in higher education institutions ay yung pagtanggal ng ating mga general education programs, pagtanggal ng history subjects, pagtanggal ng mga literature subjects. In fact, ito yung mga subjects sa history at saka sa literature where you can show documentaries to students, and discuss them. This is a great opportunity. Pero dahil nga ang tingin na sa mga ito ay mga superfluous subjects that that students should be working on their specializations, they don't need the humanities anymore, nababawasan yung space in our institutions to actually pose these questions. And the funny thing, minsan din yung ating mga educational policymakers, sabihin nila, critical thinking is a skill. I don't believe that critical thinking is a skill. A skill is something that you do over and over again, and you become better and better at it. Critical thinking is to go beyond repetition, to go beyond what is done, not just to copy something, repeat something, but to break through, transform things, go into a new horizon, beyond what we did before. Kaya hindi skill ang critical thinking. It's something more fundamental than that.
Doy?
Wow, yan na ba yung mirror, boy, na hinaharap mo sa amin?
Yeah, okay. Harap mo ang ating mahiwagang Doy.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Well, of course, in the classroom, we try as much as possible to encourage critical thinking. The university is an ideal place. It's a place where a lot of ideas are brought forth and are discussed. But of course, it's not divorced, separate from what's happening outside, right? So yeah, that should be the aim actually in the university, to talk and discuss and to argue about issues. Encouragement of critical thinking is a primary objective.
And create a vibrant community between teachers and among teachers and between teachers and students. That whole community where debate is spirited, and because that's where change and growth happen. You wanted to say something, Professor Guillermo?
Wala po. Sorry.
Wala naman. Okay. Ramona, may nagpapatanong lamang because your documentaries brought you so much fame. It's a question. Miss
That's
Diaz,
relative, I think.
Are you comfortable with fame?
Gosh, I don't feel
Talaga?
famous. No, I don't at all. That's why I think that's relative. I don't. I think it's anathema to what I do because, right, I have to remain anonymous because I think fame then takes away. If I'm not, then I can't blend into the different environments where I go to film, right? So anonymity, I think, is really key to what I do, because otherwise, I have no use for fame in my work, because I really like to immerse. I like to immerse in people's lives, and I like to really blend as much as possible. Of course, that is not possible because the presence, and this is a whole other discussion, the presence of the camera changes whatever happens, right? Your very presence changes already what will happen in front of it. So I don't think I have no need for it. That maybe only because maybe I can then raise the next money for the next film. That's my only use for it. But in my actual work,
okay, Ramona, which is primary. I mean, as you said earlier, it's the next film. It's about the next film. Do you agree? It's anathema to. I mean, I know that's something personal to Ramona, but is fame anathema to your work as a documentarist?
I don't think it comes into play, right? It even comes into my mind. No. And that's why I don't think that the aim of the documentary filmmaker is to be able to show the film in a lot of festivals and to win awards. No. That is just an adjunct to the process, but that is not the aim. So fame doesn't play at all, in the process.
I think it's an aim for me, because that's how I build a sustainable career. For me, right? It's really about being able to make the next film and the film after that and the film after that. So how it rolls out, how it's seen, how it's reviewed, how it's critiqued is really important to building my career as a filmmaker, as a sustainable career.
Yeah, but you must admit, Ramona, what in real life, when people, I'm sure of this, when people say, "I'm sorry, you're Ramona Diaz, the director of," you get that?
Yeah, I do, but then it's also very surreal to me, because I don't always get it. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? It's like, sometimes I'm surprised. I'm like, you saw it? I mean, I put it out there. You hope people see it, but of course now it's more immediate, right? My connection with the audience is more immediate because of social media, because we can directly engage with the audience, which it's kind of nice. That's what I'm missing in the pandemic, actually. The engagement, the real engagement with the audience. In person. Yes, of course I get that, but you try to forget it. Right? It's not the point of making documentaries. At least it's not. I think it's an impoverished way to live, to go after fame, right? I mean, because then it's fame for fame's sake is like.
I like what you say.
About? I don't know.
It's an impoverished way to look at fame.
Right.
That's a line. Nicole, how can we encourage more people? How, especially the young, to watch documentaries?
Actually, to be honest, I find it very difficult to answer that question, because there are realities we have to embrace. People are time poor, there's digital poverty, and in this current context, attention is the scarcest resource, right? Yeah. So I think I don't want to be preachy to tell young people to watch documentaries, but I think we also have to shift the conversation in terms of audience blaming, na hindi kasi siguro pa masyadong mulat yung Pilipino kaya hindi makanood ng documentary. I think there are also bigger structural barriers why it's hard for us to appreciate documentaries. So I think I'm coming from that perspective of siguro empathy to people who find it challenging or find it intimidating to watch a documentary. Maybe they first have to be able to see a documentary that resonates, that's friendly, to open doors to other documentaries that may open their eyes further. So I think the conversation can begin there. Recognition that people are time poor, digitally, not impoverished, but there's digital poverty and there's attention deficit, which are real problems in this age of surveillance capitalism.
And,
but I don't know about that, the attention, because deficit. It's also an age of binge watching, right? A lot of people are binge watching long series, and they can stay there forever. So I'm not sure about that. So I think it's really about content. I think there are what we call,
it's about
what I
content.
call gateway drugs, right? Gateway drug documentaries that then can lead you to other documentaries.
exactly.
I think it's just trying to show them the form, that these are the different kinds of documentaries you can watch, and then lead them to the really, the more, I hate to say important ones, but just make them get used to the form first. I think that's key. And then if they like it and enjoy it, they'll watch more and more and more of it, right? It can't be medicine. It has to be, who said that if you want to get people's attention, make them laugh or they'll kill you, right? Who said that? I think Charlie Chaplin. So humor is a great way to, as an entry documentary form. There are many kinds of documentaries. There are humorous documentaries. There are poignant ones. There are drama. Documentaries are not it's not a genre. It's a form. And under documentaries, there are many genres. So there's something for everyone, I think.
Okay, I think you're talking basically
Yay
about
for the documentary.
and then expose people to as many forms as possible, because what Nicole also was trying to say was there should also be a recognition that right now in this country, pag sinabi mong documentary, kailangan mag-isip, kailangan, that's why it's contradictory to the, not contradictory, but you binge because it's
entertaining.
It's entertaining. Yeah. So I think exposure to diverse kinds of of documentaries can start that a habit, which is very important.
Like, it's not all gulay, right? There's also candy and
kailangan iba't ibang luto. Kung gulay man, dapat iba't ibang luto dahil maganda sa katawan ng gulay. We cannot also deny that gulay is good for the body.
Of course, yeah.
Pero iba-ibahin lang natin yung look, yung packaging para kaaya-aya at palatable. It becomes a sybaritic feast.
There you go.
Yeah, I don't think our audience would binge watch Aswang followed by Menjola Massacre, and then the other films. Yeah, they look for a mix of documentaries.
Yung gusto kong idagdag ay kaunti yung sinabi ni Ramona kanina that the evolution of documentaries hasn't stopped. So I think documentaries can continue experimentation with the form. And that so that yung concept natin, this is a documentary, it's like this, no? And these are the components, ganyan. Oh, another boring documentary, sasabihin ng mga kabataan, no? So I think it's since it hasn't stopped evolving, and there are so many things we can do today to develop new kinds of documentaries, new kinds of documentaries. I